Welcome into a Tuesday, January 7th edition of Daily Faceoff Live. The show is a presentation of Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Frank, Jan 7 means 2 months until the NHL trade deadline. You ready? You getting in the groove? You getting in your zone?
Yes. I mean, the answer is yes, but it's, man, it feels far away, but also like scary close, if that makes any sense at all.
No, I definitely feel that because February is always a month that just seems to fly by. And when things start picking up, I think it will absolutely be cruising to deadline day on March 7th. Excited for our yearly trade deadline special as well, but that's a conversation for another day. Frank, we're going to talk about your all new trade targets board in a little bit. I got a pick 'em question for you, or a couple of them actually. Also, we have our Dominion Lending Center's poll question up right now in the YouTube. Which Western team will be the most aggressive buyer this deadline season? Your options are Edmonton, Vegas, Dallas, or other. Maybe Colorado should have been in the mix there as well. We'll discuss that in a second as well. But first, let's zero in on the hockey we saw last night, Frank, including a notable or somewhat notable matchup between the Montreal Canadiens and Vancouver Canucks. Notable in the sense that Quinn Hughes returned to the lineup for the Vancouver Canucks, playing 26-15, 5 minutes and 20 seconds more than any other Canucks defenseman. And Hughes logs heavy minutes. The Canucks lose in overtime, and he does it all with a pretty interesting looking splint sort of thing on his hand as well. Looking at that splint, looking at how the Canucks threw Hughes back into the lineup, what'd you make of his return?
Yeah, first off, that thing looks gross. It looks like the claw. I don't like, I can just envision a very stinky, smelly claw at that, because he's a hockey player, and that's gruesome. So obviously he's still playing through whatever it is that he's been dealing with. And by the way, like, he's back quickly. Like when we got to the other side of the holiday break, it was, week to week, and it's January 7th. It's the second week and he's back. So, I think full marks to him for getting back, and timing was of the essence because this Canucks team really struggled so far this year, not having Quinn Hughes and Philip Hronek in the lineup. No shock there. I mean, take a look at their defense core. It is, you take Quinn Hughes out of the mix, and it's kind of as tough as it gets in the NHL. I made the joke, but not really a joke. When you have Forbort and Desharnais running your power play, I'm not sure this is a defense core that, take Quinn Hughes out of the mix, is winning the Calder Cup. But I mean, maybe a bridge too far. Either way, highlights the importance of Quinn Hughes, not just as a Norris Trophy guy, but this season with his contributions, a potential Hart Trophy candidate. And they desperately needed him. So I think maybe more interesting than the Hughes return, which, yes, the Canucks blow a lead and they lose in OT, some Lane Hudson magic. To me, what about JT Miller?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Canucks, by the way, have gone to overtime now in 12 of their 39 games this season, Frank, which is crazy. And you can view that glass half full, glass half empty. You could say, hey, the drama, the injuries, all that, at least they're milking points. Or you could sit there and say, not nearly as dominant as they were 12 months ago. JT Miller having the game he did, also significant, though. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you get that type of effort from JT Miller, and given all that's gone on, like, you get Hughes back in the lineup. To me, I'm looking at that going, okay, 2-goal night from Miller. He seemed to control so much of the game. And now moving forward, what does this mean? To see those guys kind of take control and grab this team by the horns again, really interesting to me. I wonder, I'm just not saying it is, I'm just wondering if it will be a turning point.
Yeah, 4 points for JT Miller in that hockey game. The other side of this, a come from behind victory by the Montreal Canadiens. And hey, we were talking about the minutes that Quinn Hughes logged. You touched on Lane Hudson. 25-19. Frank, 3 points, all of them coming in either the third period or overtime. He assisted on the Nick Suzuki winner, and the Montreal Canadiens wake up this morning and technically find themselves in a playoff spot. They're in the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. We talked a lot about the Habs yesterday with Arpon Basu from The Athletic. They get a big win, 8-2 in their last 10. But let me just throw this to you, because we didn't talk about this with Arpon. Lane Hudson and his Calder odds. Frank, I know you were a guy who was, kind of championing his chances of winning the award from the get-go this year. For a while there, talk kind of cooled, but with performances like that, he's got to be right in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, You didn't ask, but my ballot today would be Celebrini 1, Hudson 2, Mitchkov 3. I mean, Hudson, he was my preseason pick. He's on track for 55 assists. We're looking at a 60-point rookie defenseman. This is Brian Leach territory. I think Nick Lidstrom is the last to do it. It's pretty special, and I think we've known that it's special, but I don't know. People spent the first 6 weeks of the season shitting on him.
Yeah, and honestly, it's kind of weird when you look on social media. Other fan bases, and maybe it's just the other Canadian fan bases that are pushed into my algorithm, seem to love to make fun of the Habs fans for how much they love Quinn Hughes, Lane Hudson. But you look at the way he played last night, and man, he is deserving of a lot of praise. A big reason why.
It's jealousy, or either that, or they're tired of hearing about the Montreal Canadiens and their fan base and how loud it can be, because they were so excited for him. There's probably some bit of that too, but either way, special player. And he's not a perfect player. No player is, but celebrate these guys for what they're really good at instead of, wanting to knock them for what they're not. He's been asked to do a lot. You mentioned his ice time. He had a game in the first 3 weeks of his career where he played 30 minutes in 4 seconds. Like, it's not his fault the rest of the Habs decor isn't as good as he is.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point as well. Speaking of falling in love, how about Mackenzie Blackwood and the Colorado Avalanche, Frank? Since the trade from San Jose to Colorado, Mackenzie Blackwood is 7-1-1. He is not allowed more than two or not allowed 2+ goals in any of those 9 games. And as our boy Beebs from Daily Faceoff Fantasy pointed out, that 5-year extension is already looking pretty good, and it's going to keep looking better if Blackwood can keep this up. It's been quite the run for Blackwood. Yesterday, it was a 3-1 win for the Avalanche over the Panthers. And quickly, before I give your take, let's get Nathan MacKinnon's take on this, because he had some interesting comments before the game.
I thought actually we played pretty good all season, and now we're just getting a lot of saves. He's so big in there, and every game it's ours for the taking with him in net. So I think that's the biggest difference.
Thanks so much, Nate.
Shout out to our pal Jesse Montano and Guerrilla Sports. But Frank, what do you make of Blackwood's start in Colorado?
Well, I want to first address Beebs's comments there, because I'm sorry. Like, I don't care what happens the remainder of this season. The price that the Colorado Avalanche paid for Mackenzie Blackwood is still the very most that they would have paid, even if he plays like this all the rest of the way. He was never going to vault himself into the 7-8 whatever $1 million goaltender. Just not going to happen, not with his recent track record. And so to get out in front of it, again, I don't have any issue if you want to pay Mackenzie Blackwood 5.25 and you want to do it times 2 years, but doing it by 5, you've just put yourself in Jack Campbell and Tristan Jarry territory, which there's a reason why those goalies in that mid-range payroll for goalies have ended up exactly where they've been, due to the inconsistencies of the position. Given that Blackwood has those inconsistencies, this start has been great. And Beeb's question about would he be on Team Canada had he started the year in Colorado is a valid one. And in fact, I wonder what Logan Thompson would have to say about that, because his numbers have been the best of any Canadian goalie so far this year, and he's still not on Team Canada. So we've got about a month left for injury replacements. I'd imagine Blackwood would be on the list. And the translation that I got from Nathan MacKinnon is that Blackwood has just given this team a chance to win every night. The phrase that he used, it's ours for the taking, I thought that was fascinating. It just speaks to the confidence that the Colorado Avalanche have.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth there at the end. Confidence right now in Colorado. They're down 1-0 to the defending Stanley Cup champions after 1, and they just kind of keep at it. End up with a 3-1 victory, including a Mikko Rantanen empty netter. They're back in action Wednesday against Chicago. And Frank, a nice little smooth transition here to our Pick'em segment, which kind of ties in the poll question, I guess, too, because we're talking about the big dogs in the Western Conference. But let me float this to you. Blackwood and Wedgwood, Skinner and Pickard. If you had to pick one goalie duo, which one would you choose?
Blackwood and Wedgwood.
Do you like the upside of Blackwood more than Skinner, or do you like the strength of the combo? Yes and yes?
Yes and yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think if you're ranking the 4 goalies, Pickard is 4 of 4, and Blackwood is 1.
Blackwood not having necessarily the games played or the big game experience that someone like Skinner doesn't do a ton to sway you?
No, because I've also seen him falter in those moments as well.
Yeah, and I think that's fair as well. All right, I got a couple more pick'ems for you, Frank. Yesterday we talked about the young decor that's forming in Minnesota, with Zeev Buium having a standout performance at the World Juniors. We all know how good Brock Faber is, and then right in the middle is David Jiricek. And it got me talking with our boy Stephen Ellis about who is the best young decor in all of hockey. So let me throw this to you. We do a lot of this with the forward groups, like, oh, which forward would you want to build around? If I gave you these three decors, you got Faber, Buium, Jiricek, and Mini. In Detroit, you have Seider, Edvinson, and Sandin Pellikka, another standout from the World Juniors. In Montreal, you have Lane Hudson. We were just gushing about him, with Logan Mailloux and David Reinbacher. Which one would you choose to build around?
Minnesota. I mentioned yesterday, I think Zeev Buium was the best player in the tournament, and that includes leading scorer Cole Hudson and Ryan Leonard and some of the other special players that played in the tournament, and Sandin Pellikka. But Brock Faber, to me, he's by far the best player on this list. So he's a clear number one by a significant margin if you're going to rank all 9. Now, that said, it's the strength of the total 3. So I'm still going with Minnesota because I am a big believer in David Jiricek, and I thought the price that they paid to get him from Columbus was really reasonable. The question for me would be who I went with second after Minnesota. And I'm probably going to go with Detroit. I think the way that they're lined up is the order that I'd likely go in.
Oh, well, then good job by our boy Pat Puff to put them in the exact order. Vasily Podkolzin asks Buffalo. And I just think, again, the age that I was trying to go like under 24, under 25 and look at prospects and project ahead a little bit. But obviously the Buffalo group is a very, very good one.
I struggle with Buffalo because on paper they are. And this is kind of the root of, what I've been trying to get at all year with the Sabres is, because we all think that defense core is so good, then this team should be defending better than they are. And so I guess you could make the argument, is that a coaching thing? Is it a structure thing? Do they not get enough help from their forwards? Has their goaltending been just okay to the point where it's letting them down? And I think what I keep coming back to is, and I said this on a recent Frankly Speaking, I think you'd have to consider, if you are Kevyn Adams, maybe moving one of those two in Owen Power or Rasmus Dahlin, because there's value there. And not only that, it's just right now it's not working. It doesn't mean it won't work, and maybe some different combination will. It'd be a really hard trade to make, but they've been good, but I know that they haven't lived up to the expectations.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One more for you in the pick'em category. Last night, Devon Toews, 2 goals in the 3-1 win for the Avs. You take what we're seeing from him. He's playing great hockey right now, as he has basically since he put on an Avalanche sweater. And on the other side, we're seeing how much the Canucks are missing Filip Hronek. So from the young D-man conversation to the vet one, if you had to pick one of these two, they're the support guys to Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar. Which one would you pick? Which one's better?
Devon Toews. I just think with what we've seen from Toews and his ability to read and react, like, look, Hronek is by far the best partner that Quinn Hughes has ever had. That's not me saying it. That's coming from Quinn Hughes' mouth. And I think there's a lot of things that Hronek does really well. And man, the shot that he has is an absolute rocket. That said, I think Toews is a more complete player.
YouTube chat saying Toews almost unanimously. So maybe I'm lucky I didn't make this one the poll question for today. Might have been a tough look for me. But let's move along, Frank, and slowly dip our toes into the trade talk a little bit. It's our Dominion Lending Center's poll question today, and it's the idea of maybe an arms race forming in the Western Conference. Jeremiah was in earlier with a comment saying, the Oilers got to be the team that's the most aggressive. If they aren't in win now mode, I don't know who is. The problem is, who do they trade? I think you could say a similar thing with Vegas. They don't have any first rounder for the next 2 years. They're the one team of the bunch when you include Dallas and Colorado, who they don't currently have anyone who could be LTIR eligible. So maybe cap space could be an issue for Vegas. But when you consider those core 4, maybe you even want to throw a team like Winnipeg in the mix. Frank, which big Western Conference team do you think will be the most aggressive in the next 2 months?
I mean, I think logic would dictate that Jeremiah is right, that it would have to be the Oilers. Second pair right shot defenseman. I mean, is that not the target?
Yeah, I mean, I think out of all those teams, their need, singular, is the most clear cut. Like, that is number one. Any other shopping the Oilers do is pretty far down the list. I think what would be interesting is a team like Dallas and that $9 million with Tyler Seguin. Like, if Dallas wanted to go and make a big splash, they have the cap space. And when you look at Puckpedia and fire up their draft picks, and then you consider their prospect pool as well, if they wanted to do something crazy, and maybe it's not moving a Maverick Bork, maybe it's a Lion Bichelle or someone else who's not currently on the roster, they have the cap space, they have the prospect pool, they have a first-round pick in each of the next 3 drafts as well. Edmonton maybe can only afford to do one swing, and maybe it's in the rental market or in the veteran market. If Dallas wanted to do something crazy that really changes the way you look at them, they're the one team in this conversation who can really do it.
Yeah, the only thing that gives me pause is that typically has not been Jim Nill's management style. And not to say that he won't, or there won't be a departure from it, but like, they've been just steady on the rudder, not to borrow a Mike Babcock term, but they don't make big swings. Like last year, it was Chris Tanev, and it was for a second. Like it hasn't, not to say Tanev wasn't a great ad, he was, but they haven't spent major assets to go do it. Now, I think part of that is due to their overall nature and team construction profile, which is, let's have as long of a run as we can to be competitive, and maybe one of these years will be our year. Do they feel any added pressure to go out and get over the top this year? I don't sense that they do. And not only that, this regular season has been one of their least consistent of any of the seasons in the last handful.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really fair point as well. 24-13-1 on the year in Dallas. Have your say over in the YouTube chat if you want to vote on our Dominion Lending Center's poll question. And let's keep the trade talk going and get into a new edition of Icebreakers. It's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers. You can apply today for a Charm Diamond Flexity card and get approved for no interest financing on your purchase in minutes. Check out their large selection of Canadian lab-grown diamonds, mine diamonds, and more by visiting them online at charmdiamondcenters.com. An all-new trade targets board to really kick off trade deadline season, as we will begin the 2-month run to the March 7th deadline. And Frank, before I get into the specific names on your list, can I throw you the sort of general question of what's your sense on the market here? Is it trending towards a buyer's market, a seller's market? Where do you come out on that?
I think it's slightly early to make that determination, only because I think that there's still so many teams that are trying to crystallize exactly where they are and how they feel about themselves. Like, think about the Montreal Canadiens, who have been a pretty hot topic on our show the last couple of days based on their run 8-2 in their last 10. Well, if they're a playoff team or close to it, are they really going to be stripping off pieces just because? Probably not. So I hate that sort of hedge of buyer or seller, but I think with how mushy both conferences are, once you get past the 6th seed in each conference, it's kind of wide open. Like, if you were to tell me right now today that any team is out of the Eastern Conference playoff race, I'd say you're lying.
Yeah, and like, listen, I'm looking at the standings right now. The gap between Tampa Bay at wild card 1 and let's go all the way to the bottom of the conference in Buffalo, that gap is 7 points. That's absolutely insane for 10 teams to have a 7-point gap between them. So I think that's a great point.
And the Sabres are wholly capable of making up 7 points. They just are.
Yeah, you go 8-2 over a stretch of 10 games, which isn't even the 10-12 game heater that we've seen teams in the past go on. Look at Nashville last year, and yeah, you're right back in the mix there. Let's go to the top of your trade targets board, Frank. Your number 1 is Brock Nelson. What can you tell us about Nelson, his availability, and maybe what the Islanders could be looking for?
Yeah, so it just feels like time with Brock Nelson. There's a few things. The Islanders aren't going anywhere, and yes, I know he's a lifelong Islander. But the center position is at such a scarcity there's a big reason why there's 2 centers right at the top of this list. There's way more teams looking for centers than there are centers available. And so Nelson to me stands out as the sort of premier deadline rental addition at the center position. He's someone that is, yes, having a down year. He's on track for his lowest production since 2017-18. But to me, he's someone that has high-end potential. And when you look at the list of teams that would be interested, the team that really stands out is Minnesota. It's his home state, War Road, Minnesota product. And also, yes, it kind of felt like Team USA with Bill Guerin as their GM went out of his way to select Brock Nelson for a Four Nations face-off. That I think that, if anything, just confirms his interest, I would say, in Brock Nelson.
Hey, and that's fair. The fit would make a ton of sense. Minnesota could obviously use some scoring help. Really, Frank, when you look at your top 3 there, all 3 of those forwards kind of scratch different itches, though, don't they? Yanni Gourde at number 2 would be your sort of stereotypical bottom 6 gritty playoff guy. Taylor Hall for a team who maybe doesn't want to spend Brock Nelson price and want some scoring help. Like, all 3 of them fit different niches.
Yeah, they do. And I think maybe one common thread with all of them is they've all kind of slowed down a little bit in the last few years, that their production has waned. But the interesting part when you're looking at 3 guys that are pending UFAs is you don't necessarily need them for the next 5 years. You just want 5 really good weeks out of them when it comes to playoff time. And so that's really kind of when you look at the high-end nature of Taylor Hall, or the quintessential third-line centerpiece that's Yanni Gourde, like, I think, the idea to rejuvenate and give these 3 guys a shot in the arm probably should stand out.
Yeah. Brock Nelson, by the way, does have a teammate on your trade targets board, that being JG Pajot, who comes in a little bit lower down, but they are not.
Kyle Palmieri's on there as well.
Sorry, yes, Kyle Palmieri as well, who comes in on your list at 13. But they're not the New York team that's dominating your top 25 here, Frank. The New York Rangers have 4 players on the board. All of them are defensemen. When you go from Ryan Lindgren, Will Borgen, who they just got from Seattle, by the way, and a couple of young guys, and Zach Jones and even Keandre Miller at 24. Do the Rangers need to be a certain amount out of the playoffs, or a certain distance from a playoff spot from the deadline, or at the deadline, to seriously consider moving on from these guys? Or do you think they're available and willing to make moves no matter what?
I think in the long haul, when it comes to someone like Keandre Miller, or I'm not talking about the sort of shorter term pieces, Lindgren pending UFA, Borgen, another guy that I thought was just a nice fit. And, when you're talking about reconstructive surgery of your roster, I mean, the first thing this tells you is that this is a defense unit in flux. And, Zach Jones has been part of that, healthy scratch for 6 straight games. He's also on the list, trying to find him a new opportunity. They've got a lot of work to do. And when you think about the Rangers and the struggles that they've had, so many of their concerns emanate from their own end. Yes, it's a structure issue. Yes, it's also forwards playing defense better, but they need to defend better starting from their defense core out. And so I think they need to find a way to reinvent that. Borgen has been a pretty solid fit to this point. I know Zach Jones at 20 has been a victim of Euro Vakanainen coming in, and they've just frankly just given him the role ahead of Jones. But Chris Drury and his staff have a lot of questions to answer about what this Ranger defense looks like moving forward.
You mentioned just how mushy it is kind of in both conferences, and there might be some teams who maybe didn't fully believe that this year was a playoff year, but have found themselves square in the mix, Frank. And that brings me to some of the young guys in your top 10 who have either term, or in the case of a Bowen Byram, team control, who is a pending RFA. You have Byram at 7, you have Farabee at 6, you have Cousins at 5. With how many of the, and I hope this makes sense, but with how many of these mushy teams there are who are like, okay, we don't want to sell, maybe we want to add, but we're not cup contenders. Could that drive up the price of these young players with control?
Well, I think the price is already high. So let's start there. I mean, like when you're looking at Dylan Cousins, the Sabres are still looking at him through the prism of a 31 goal, 68 point forward. Now, maybe that's unfair, and maybe a reason why a trade hasn't been consummated is because for these last 2 seasons, he's producing more like an 18 goal, 40 some point scorer. That's really what he's been trending towards. And so the big question is, which one is the real Dylan Cousins? Was that one statistical outlier season, or the 68-point year, or is this what we can expect from him moving forward? And if so, you have to readjust your expectations, but you can't readjust the contract, which has 5 years left at $7.1 million per year. The Sabres have received, in my belief, more interest in Dylan Cousins than just about anyone on their roster, but they've been getting calls on everyone. And it's one of those decisions that Kevin Adams, having seen Dylan Cousins at his very best, it's in there somewhere. How do you find a way to get that out consistently? Because if so, then he should be part of your solution. Right now, it feels like with where he's at, it's just a giant question mark.
Yeah, it really is almost a bit of a catch-22 where it's like, okay, you're not going to get the value you want for Dylan Cousins if he's not playing his best hockey. But if he starts playing his best hockey and he's so young, you suddenly go, well, why would we trade this guy? He's playing so well. It's an interesting spot. Frank's full trade targets board going to be available at dailyfaceoff.com, so you can read more about it there. And in the meantime, let's move along to our Daily Faceoff inbox question. Poll question and the inbox question, both brought to you by Dominion Lending Centers. Is your mortgage up for renewal here in 2025? You can lock in the best rates and products with Dominion Lending Centers. Visit them online, dominionlending.ca. A couple in here. We got a couple on the Jets over the last few days, Frank, both from SK, who said, will the Jets ever get a real second line center? SK, why is Byram available? Man, I would love to see him on my Jets. I mean, listen, you and probably 10 to 15 other fan bases would love to see Bowen Byram on their team, SK, but what can you tell us about the Jets ahead of the deadline, Frank?
Yeah, I think the Jets are interesting because they were so active last year and then fell so flat in the playoffs that I truly wonder this year, and SK, you're not going to want to hear this, are they going to be a team that does less and not more? I think there's something to the idea of whatever swagger and mojo you have to allow that to keep rolling. And I wonder about that for a few teams. Look at the teams that have won. Clearly, they're the teams that haven't gone out and spent the most. It's really rare that the Stanley Cup winner was the most active deadline team. And I don't know why it feels like it takes a long time for that messaging to get through. It's about setting realistic goals and expectations. Sometimes teams lose themselves in the frenzy and the thought process of, going out to make the biggest splash, but you're trying to win a Stanley Cup, not win press conferences. And I get the idea of managers acting to try and save their job or to take a swing, and I love it. But I mean, I wouldn't hate if the Jets play this a little bit more conservatively.
Love that line, win Stanley Cups, not press conferences. The results of our poll question and all that kind of line of thinking, why the Jets weren't one of those options. They fall in the other category, which came last in our poll. Vegas wins the Twitter vote. Edmonton finishes number 1 on our YouTube vote, which I found interesting. Vegas is second on the YouTube, Dallas in third at 21%. So some mixed results from both the Twitter and the YouTube as for which Western team will be the most aggressive buyer this deadline season. Let's move along to our daily face-off best, or our daily bets, brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. A couple of plays for you this evening. Straight plays. The Leafs, for I feel like the first time ever, are being undervalued by the books. This is the second time in a week I'm playing them. They're minus 130 on the money line on the road against the Flyers. The Flyers only have 3 wins in their last 10 games. The Leafs are on a 4-game heater, 7-3 in their last 10. I love this spot. Toronto at minus 130. I'd even dabble in the puck line at nearly 2-1. And I like the over between Ottawa and Detroit. 4+ goals in 4 straight games for the Detroit Red Wings, and the Sens are without Ullmark, so I like the Wings to produce some offense. Sens offense been a little sleepy as of late, but I think they could bounce back against Detroit. Give me the over 6 at minus 105, which brings us to garbage time, Frank, and ending on a bit of a sad note. Rest in peace to Al McNeil, the legendary coach and executive. Won 3 Stanley Cups with the Canadiens, won a cup with the Flames as an AGM. Sad news out of both Calgary and Montreal.
Yeah, a hockey lifer, and really a true gentleman at that. So gonna miss seeing Al McNeil around. And look, Just a contributor really to the legacy and foundation of the Flames from the very beginning. He was the holdover coach, decided to move from Atlanta to Calgary, help get that franchise started in Cowtown, and look at the success that they had. Assistant GM for the 1989 Cup winners. You mentioned just a serial winner, 4-time Stanley Cup winner, 2-time Memorial Cup winner as a player, 2-time AHL Calder Cup winner, AHL Calder or AHL Coach of the Year twice. What I would say to that is a hockey life well lived, Mr. McNeil.
Yeah, absolutely a winner in that. So rest in peace to Al. Our condolences to his family and friends and to both organizations. That is a wrap on a Tuesday, January 7th edition of the show. We are going to be back tomorrow. We still got a lot going on this week. John Goyens, Stephen Ellis, Carter Hutton's going to make an appearance as well. Plenty of reasons to be subscribed to the YouTube. Enjoy the hockey tonight, and we'll chat with you again tomorrow at noon Eastern. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Seravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.